die Übernahme der Position Verantwortung für Fehler ist der erste Schritt auf dem Weg zur Wiedergutmachung. Die ersten Schritte hin zu klugen Entscheidungen in der Zukunft. The acceptance of personal responsibility is the first step towards redemption. First steps towards wise future actions. So guten Morgen. Welcome to our Novi Global Network. So I generally don't like speaking too much about the Prime Minister because I understand it is a very difficult job and the gentleman already has a lot on his plate. But there are times when situation becomes so grave and dire that I feel compelled in the interest of the nation to say the hard truths and what has to be said, in the hope that there can be some self-correction, in the hope that a better approach can be adopted when it comes to the running of the affairs of the nation. So in this life, it is extremely easy to make excuses. It is extremely easy to find scapegoats. But what is difficult is the ability to recognize when you've made mistakes and you need to accept responsibility for those actions. And especially when you have obligations to a nation, when you are responsible for the protection and security of that nation, that if you make a mistake, then you come to the nation and you acknowledge that you've made a mistake. And you pledge to the nation that going forward, you would be more wise, sober, and vigilant about what you do. That is the only way that progress would be made. You don't get to make a plethora of excuses when negligence was made and say, well, it wasn't my fault, or try to displace responsibility to other people. And unfortunately, we see a pattern of that particular behavior with this administration. So when you make grave strategic blunders that has incurred deadly consequences for the people of Grenada, you don't get to come now and pretend that you still are some demagogic strategic master on the subject of geopolitics. It comes across a tidbit arrogant and can rub the Grenadian people the wrong way. When your actions prove that you are ill-equipped, ill-prepared, or ill-advised to deal with the situation that was presented before you. You have to understand that you have to accept the responsibility for the blunders and then do an analysis of what caused the blunders. But you don't get to come on a friendly media and play it off like yet still you understood the full situation, but your actions prove that you didn't. Because I'll tell you what, it comes across as demagogic. It comes across that you're appealing and playing with the emotions of the people. It comes across as downright sweet talk. And in critical times, none of us need sweet talk. And it comes across ultimately as downright uncaring. As to say, I can do whatever I want and it doesn't matter. All I have to do is come and sweet talk the population and I'm off the hook. You may be off the hook, but the people of Grenada are not off the hook. The consequences are, in the very short term, devastating on the people of Grenada. And depending on how things goes, could be long lasting. We need people that demonstrate practical, wise, sound judgment, because the stakes are too high, as we have seen. So you don't get to come and pretend you understand everything that took place, when obviously your actions prove that you didn't have a clue. So in essence, what happened is that you gambled with the life, the security, and the well-being of the Grenadian people in one of the most politically charged geopolitical situations that we have seen in recent times in the Caribbean. Some people may say that in the annals of politics, it was a cardinal sin. It may lead some people to believe that it would be difficult going forward to trust one's judgment on such serious matters. In situations like these, the historical context has to be taken into consideration. The forces, economic, military, and psychological, that are arrayed against you, and the interests, only interests of Grenada. That is how decisions are made. And that will determine what you say and what you don't say, and what you do and what you don't do. One has got to understand that the office of the Prime Minister is like the vanguard leading the charge in the protection of Grenada and its citizens. And the ministers are likened to the Praetorian Guard protecting the Prime Minister and the interests of the people of Grenada. So ultimately, there should be some sort of unity of action. And the sole aim of the Prime Minister and the ministers is the protection of the people of Grenada. Your loyalties cannot lie more to other people than the citizens of Grenada. Your interests cannot lie more to the interests of other people than the citizens of Grenada. That would be the ultimate dereliction of duty. Given that understanding, one should be like a soldier on guard duty, protecting the interests of the nation. There is no time for reckless speech and reckless actions, especially in the climate that the Caribbean finds itself now. So it is important to know that you don't know. That is the only way that you would be able to take corrective action. There must be self-awareness. You can't come with fancy speeches and think that the Grenadian people would not have recognized that there were several blunders in dealing with the situation. And you don't get, as leader of the nation, especially when your line ministry is responsible for infrastructure, and say, oh, well, it's not the government job. Oh, that's not our job. That's Nawasa's job. Nawasa is the client, which may be the case, but ultimately, what happens in the country, you are like the CEO of the country, just as there's a CEO of a company. So if you saw something was gravely going wrong in the South, in the road project, in the trenching and the laying of pipes, it is imperative, it is a responsibility of government to find some way to step in. So you can't say, oh, well, the contract was already given and there's nothing we can do. We can't stop the payment from CDB. So you sit there and Grenadians just deal with whatever is taking place. Is that the approach? Is that the way we accept responsibility when problems occur? Is that what we're teaching the youth of Grenada and young kids about acceptance of responsibility? Let's take a look at some of the responses that the Prime Minister gave on Ms. Callistra's show.
Prime Minister, we saw a big issue develop after some time of military buildup in the Caribbean. In the southern Caribbean, the United States moved into Venezuela, took the president-elect. He's now in the United States on criminal charges. Have you, I know that there's been a lot of talk about international law and the violation of international law and all those issues. But have you spoken with Caracas at all since all of this?
No, I have not spoken with Caracas since all of this. What our foreign ministry would have done, obviously, and people seem to have completely forgotten that in this entire exercise, is that people died. And so we would have expressed our condolences and sympathy to the Venezuelan government and the Cuban government and the loss of lives of their citizens arising from the capture by President Maduro by the U.S. Armed Forces.
So I believe it's quite obvious, you can see it, based on the Prime Minister's body language, that he has come to appreciate the seriousness of the situation and the office of the Prime Ministry. He has come, definitely has come, to appreciate the seriousness of the situation in the Caribbean. And you can see that every time this subject or even the mention of the United States is made, that there is some sort of physical discomfort emanating from the Prime Minister. And understandably so. In some respects, it's like the parallels in World War II, that just the mention of the German army would have terrified the people who were on the receiving end. And of course, I am sure that the mention of the United States does in some respect drive a bit of terror into the most fearless. But as I have said in the past, to my very good friends on Ride Along, about 7 months ago, before all of this transpired, I said to them, I want you to be scared. I want you to be scared.
Just isolated Grenada, but that's just one. But, I listened to Harry a while ago, and he made me think that there is some restriction imposed on Grenada already, and that there is a list of Grenadians whose visa has been revoked or restricted or some sanction or something. I mean, he spoke there frightening, scaring the hell.
I want you to be scared. I want you to be scared. That was deliberate. Because as Junior would understand, and people in the annals of international politics will understand, that this is a warning shot. Again, you are dealing with a hawkish president. By some measure, people may say. So I'm saying to you, their measures may be incremental. This may be a first step. And then there could be consequences subsequently for Grenadians collectively. Because fear sometimes would propel you to proper and correct actions. And all of these discussions was held over 7 months ago on Ride Along with Junior and Kim. And it was in the public domain. And it was in the public domain. But no one took humble advice. But I have a strange feeling that everyone, all and sundry, now appreciates, without a doubt, what I was saying.
Are we still getting petrochemical?
We have not been getting petrochemical for a long time. The sanctions that were placed on all Venezuelan oil-related entities would have essentially collapsed the Petrocarib arrangement long before I even got into office.
Is CARICOM planning to make any other statement or public comment on the Venezuela situation or take any sort of positioning? Or?
Well, I can't answer that. I think that's best directed to Chairman.
Yes. Okay, now.
So this is an interesting piece of information. Grenada was not receiving Petrocarib oil. So the question arises, why Grenada was so ardently in the midst of the spat and the conflict with the US and Venezuela? Because I could understand if there are benefits being derived, I could understand that you'll want to take care of your friends and the people who are providing you with some immeasurable benefit. Because let's not be sentimental. In the annals of politics and nations, it's not about friend. It's about common interests. And it's about hardcore benefits. That, my friends, is how the world works. So the question arises also, what was the motivation for all the bravado and brazenness expressed by the PM and his close affiliates? What was all the brazenness expressed by all the usual suspects who were all over the place trying to tell Grenadians, stand up? So was it all for nothing? Or maybe were the people leading the charge deriving personal benefits and was using the Grenadian people for their own selfish aims and gains? That is the question that the Grenadian people need to ask. Why was your well-being, security, and economic prosperity jeopardized and gambled with? What was the reason? Again, I see parallels in the 79-83 period, and I wonder why.
From a national standpoint, Prime Minister, your Ministry of Infrastructure has been taking a lot of hits because of the, particularly what's happening with the roads. One of our major commercial centers, Grenadians, is like that. What can you say to the public about why everything seems to be moving so slow, Sean?
In a sense, the question is directed at me as the Minister for Infrastructure, but I should emphasize that the pipeline exercise is a NAWASA project, funded by the UKSIF government. And the consultant is headed by Nigel John on behalf of the client, NAWASA. The contractor is Mr. Joe Gilbert and whatever his company is. So perhaps if you want real specifics, you should contact these three entities, NAWASA, Mr. Gilbert, and Mr. John. But
give you a report.
But no. I mean, no. I'm going to come to that. So I will do my best to explain my own dissatisfaction with what has transpired.
So there it is. The Prime Minister deflects, and he basically chose under the bus NAWASA, the engineering company, and the resident engineer or coordinating engineer, Nigel John. It's not his responsibility. But I like what Ms. Callistra, and kudos to her, she did say, well, they all report to you eventually, right? And then he went on to explain still why they should be blamed and talks about once a contract is made, there's hardly anything you can do, and CDB is responsible for paying them, so you cannot block the payments and stuff like that. You can take a look at Ms. Callistra's show to get the details. But the main thing is that he basically absolved himself of any responsibility for what is going on there. Oh, it's the contractor. Oh, it's NAWASA. Oh, it's Mr. Nigel John. And while I do agree that Mr. Nigel John bears some major sense of responsibility, especially with all this gravel being all over the goddamn place, Because as a resident engineer on a job, you are supposed to represent the interests of the client. The client in this case being Nawasa. That is what you are there for. To ensure that the project or things are being done on time, on schedule, and in the correct manner. But it's quite obvious, and I'm a little disappointed, that the gentleman, and I know the gentleman, I know when the gentleman started off his engineering career with his old man at the end of Green Street. Okay? And I'm talking about over 30-something years ago. So the gentleman has 30 plus years of experience in engineering. And the gentleman allows the contractor on his watch to take gravel, okay, and cover the trenches as some sort of quick fix because people were complaining that the vehicles were having a hard time. That was a horrible quick fix. So I am surprised that a man of 30 plus years experience would not have known that if you take gravel and you throw it on top of mud, that when vehicle tires rotate over it, that it's not going to remain in place, but it would scatter all over the place, all over the road, and cause the disaster that was happening in Grenadians. This gentleman should have known better. And I'm trying so hard to find some way to rationalize why that decision was made. Because I like the gentleman, from a long time ago. I hope he's the same person. I think generally he has very good intentions and he's very knowledgeable, it seems. But for that negligence, it overshadows the gentleman's ability. So I wonder, and hopefully I'll have a conversation with him sometime, if it was not some sort of pressure to get something done quickly, that he allowed himself to not be guided by pure engineering judgment. Because as I have said in other videos, that all that was needed to done, you could have used the gravel, okay? But all that needed to done was to get some geocell wrap, cut it to the widths and lengths of the trenches, anchor it with some J-hooks, and then pour the gravel on top of it, okay? And what that does is those geocells, when they're filled up, they keep the gravel in place. So when the vehicles move, the gravel is not splattering all over the place. Because that is a method for building farm roads. So the use of the geocell with the gravel could have been an effective temporary fix. And the geocells are inexpensive. They come in rolls. You just cut them and lay them and anchor them and then pour the gravel.
We simply don't have an army. We can't afford to keep enemies. There's no army to defend Grenada. We don't have one. So it's important for us to not get emotional simply because a particular country may pursue a policy that we think is unfriendly or hurtful or harmful to us.
Well, look how brilliantly masterful the Prime Minister speaks. And I emphasize speaks on these issues. I don't know. Quite possibly, maybe within the last couple of weeks or month, he has gotten supreme clarity on the issue. Because what the PM is talking about right now is something I believe that should have been understood a very long time ago, before all of what transpired recently had transpired. Then just maybe Grenada would not have found itself in the situation it finds itself. So he says, oh, we don't have an army. Of course we don't have an army. But people tend to stress army, army, army. It's not just about army. If you don't have an army, then what is next? Diplomacy and extremely cautious and shrewd maneuvering. And that is something that evidently was not done. So he says, oh, we shouldn't get emotional. We shouldn't get emotional. because a country pursues what is in their best interest. I agree totally. Then the question is, why did Grenada and certain people get so emotional, hijack the thinking on the issue, and they were trying to influence public opinion about the issue, that they influenced it to such an extent that you had people all over Facebook and social media taking cues from them and acting reckless and making reckless statements. But F Donald Trump, but so-and-so Donald Trump, who's Donald Trump? This is what the mass of Grenadian people on social media was saying. So if someone was looking on, they would have thought that that was the collective opinion of the Grenadian people. I mean, you should have seen the vitriolic stuff that was said about the President of the United States. Any person who has a basic understanding of the world and the amount of resources that are available to certain nations in the world, if that wasn't demonstrated recently, then some people will never learn. I wouldn't even lock myself in the closet and say certain bad things about certain people, because I am afraid that the walls of the closet may go back and tell them. But you get what I'm saying.
It's a policy. It doesn't change the relationship. Our job will then be to go back to say, this is why we don't think this policy should be pursued. This is what you think it will do to us. But if at the end of the day, you insist, well, that's your, every country has the right to look out for themselves. And I presume that America, the UK, Canada seeks to act in the best interest of America, UK, and Canada. My job is to seek to act in the best interest of Grenada. And I think all regional leaders, their job is to seek to act in the best interest of the countries and in the region.
So does the Prime Minister believe that his actions were in the best interests of Grenada and the region after all that has transpired? Or was he just catering to local socialist Marxists and the Grenadian Bolsheviks?